I guess I have to read. Do we let attendees in first, or do I read this? I'll read it first.
Yeah,
Pursuant,
read that first.
pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, on March 29th, 2023, Governor Maura Healey signed into law an act making appropriations for the fiscal year 2023 to provide for supplementing certain existing appropriations and for certain other activities and projects. This act includes an extension until March 31st, 2025 of the remote meeting provisions. Subject to that, the February 12th, 2024 Finance and Warrant Commission will be conducted by remote participation by the board. The chair is granting permission to Westwood Media Center to record the meeting. And if there's any else who wants to record, let us know and we will authorize that. I do not see that. So Victoria, would you, I'll welcome all participants as they come in. Would you do the member roll call, and then I'll ask Mr. Pareda to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. But let's do the roll call, okay?
Okay. John Kerry. He was with us earlier.
Yeah, John's here.
Here.
Okay. Jim Ferrero.
Here.
Lauren Fitzpatrick.
Here.
Seth Fedrickson.
Here.
Mike Gay.
I am here.
George Hertz.
Here.
Caitlin Jursak.
Here.
George Lahem.
Present.
Christina Pettit-Jewix.
Here.
Chris Beretta.
Here.
Sean Weller.
Here.
And Alex Yell.
Here.
Bill Bruce is not with us yet.
Okay, well, that's good. We've got good attendance. So Chris, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I would love to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
United
America,
States of America, and to the
and to the
republic
republic for which it
which
stands,
it stands, one
one
nation,
nation, under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with
with
liberty.
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, and I guess really the only introductory comments I want to make is as we're about to go into these budget presentations, I know that a lot of material has been sent to us, and I know we would like to get it a bit earlier than we have. However, I do want to point out this has been an extremely difficult operating budget year. I've watched the select board presentations done by Stephanie, so I think you're going to get quite an overview of the budget tonight, and it's tight. So I think we are going to be very dependent on our respective subcommittees in delving into their portions of the budget and letting us know if they're comfortable with the recommendations. So with that, Victoria, would you let, I guess, the select board members in along with Stephanie and Mr. Coleman?
Okay.
Molly, welcome. I see you. I see Chairman Marianne LeBlanc. Who else do we see here? Stephanie McManus, Mr. Gotti, and Mr. Coleman. And I wanted to see if we have Mr. Previtera. Yes, we have everybody, I believe. And I also see a couple of FinCom members have joined, Bill Bruce, and I think Lauren and everybody else. So welcome to everybody. Thank you for being here this evening. Marianne, do you want to make any introductory comments before Stephanie starts her presentation?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Great to be with you. The first thing I'd like to do, George, is just call to order the select board meeting. So thank you for that. And I will reiterate what you said a moment ago, which is that this has been a challenging budget cycle, but we are proud to present the budget that we're going to discuss tonight, which I think does a very good job in terms of balancing the town's needs, and we'll get into the detail of that, and I will rely on Stephanie, who I believe is here. There she is. There you are. too many squares to go into the detail of that.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie, as usual, welcome. And why don't you start your presentation? Stephanie, by the way, if it's okay with you, I'm going to allow questions during the presentation unless that becomes a little disruptive. I think there's so much material and so much good material. I'd like to give the FinCom members the opportunity to ask it as we go through the slides, if that's okay. All right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Hey, George, one point of order here.
Yes.
I don't think Mary Ann called the roll for the select board.
Thank you. That's probably a good idea. I will call my colleagues, Mr. Gotti
Here.
and Mr. Privatera.
Here.
We are all present.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Okay, Stephanie, it's all yours.
Great. Victoria, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that okay, George?
Yes, excellent.
Great. Awesome. So tonight I will be going through the FY25 municipal budget as well as the overall budget as they both stand right now in the process. We've sent out both the municipal and just today the overall budget books, and the following presentation will be going over the information including in those documents. And like George said, I am happy to take questions during the presentation if that works. So first, I just want to start off by saying thank you to everyone involved in the process so far. It's been collaboration between town officials, department heads, school department, and the Finance and Warrant Commission. So thank you all, and because of that work, we're able to present a balanced budget tonight that preserves a high level of services. So just going through the timeline for the presentation, I'll be reviewing the proposed FY25 municipal budget. I'll then give more details on the operating budget, which includes the municipal budget, and then walk through the proposed overall budget, including a high-level summary of expenditures and revenue sources. And then lastly, I'll just go through the next steps in the process. So the municipal budget sits within the operating budget and covers a wide range of services. There's many different needs in the community, and the goal of this budget is to really provide for those needs, including the primary DPW services, maintenance of roads and other infrastructure, as well as any public safety services. It provides programs for all ages, the COA, the library, recreation. There are then state required regulatory functions, and then the administrative departments. And as you can see, the majority of this budget, or 67%, is public safety and public works. And for FY25, the overall municipal budget as proposed is $24.8 million. We always say this, but it's true, and I know the school does this as well. The largest component of the municipal budget is staffing. So our programming is done through town staff. 82% of that budget is salaries, and a large portion of that is spent on our DPW workers, police officers, and firefighters. So the total, as you can see, the 24.8 million, about 20 million of that is directly for salaries. Here are just the specific numbers on the funding. The total proposed budget, as I said, is that $24,888,065. That is about a $1.2 million increase over FY25, or 5.1%. This amount of funding is allocated to the many different services that you can see here: general government, public safety, community and economic development, public works, human services, and then other categories. The increase in budget for salaries really makes up the total increase for the budget. It's 1.27 million, or about 6.7%. The major items that make up this increase include contractual obligations, which we have every year. And then specific to this year, we had a number of new contracts coming in on place: DPW, fire, SEIU. So everything related to that, as far as COLAs and steps, is that $769,000 number. The second piece is the addition of 2 new firefighter positions, and also the increased overtime budget for the fire department. That adds up to $250,000, and then an HVAC technician. The HVAC tech position is in DPW, And it's actually a net change since the department's budget was decreased on the expense side by that exact amount, $110,000 on the contracted services line. And in order to offset a portion of this increase for salaries, we made reductions to overall expenses, specifically within general government, just wherever possible without reducing funding for the most critical services and programs. So this graph just shows a history of the increases year over year specifically for the municipal budget. The base budget has historically had moderate growth, and we do strive for what we call those sustainable budgets. It's traditionally been about 3.5%, which is that magic number that is sustainable just due to the limits of Prop 2.5. This year, the municipal budget does include an increase in public safety staffing, which was important to the select board, and that accounts for the increase of the 5.1%. While it's not within the range we strive for, this is where we currently need to be, and we plan in future years to, stay within that sustainable 3.5 whenever possible. I guess I'll pause for a minute, George, if you'd rather me do that, or I can just keep going through and take questions at the end. That was sort of the municipal budget. I'm going to be moving on to what we call the operating budget, which includes that.
Stephanie, I think people, if they have questions along the way, they can ask, okay? So,
Okay.
Yeah. Did
All right,
anybody-
great. So town meeting approves structurally sound budgets that provide for core services. Within the operating budget are 4 main categories: school, municipal, fixed costs, and debt service, as well as the sewer budget, which has its own funding source through the enterprise fund. This is the main piece of what we call the overall budget. And I just wanted to do a breakdown to put it in perspective. Each 1% increase in any of these categories has the following impact. So the school, each 1% would be about a $550,000 increase. On the municipal side, it would be about $236,000. And on the fixed cost side, it's about $213,000. So specifically for FY25, the proposed operating budget is currently $116 million, which is about a 3.4% increase over FY24. You can see from the chart the different areas that make up the operating budget: schools, municipal, fixed costs, debt service, and that sewer fund. This budget currently also includes estimate for service for certain items, including health insurance, the Blue Hills assessment, and the MWRA assessment. And those items will all be updated and presented as soon as they come in, which will then be updated in this overall operating budget. And you can just see a breakdown of the municipal, schools, and all other pieces that make up that operating budget. Specifically with fixed costs, or what we call shared costs, for FY25, that budget is $22.2 million, which is a 4.5% increase over FY24. This category includes the budget for benefits, which is directly applied to both school and town staff, liability insurance, what we call shared accounts, which is the town's audit services, outside health agencies. It also includes waste collection and disposal services, and then the reserve funds, which include the select board and the FinCom. And you can see the breakdown between school and municipal. This is just for the benefits portion of things. So the benefits side accounts for about 18 out of that $22.2 million. And looking specifically at that category, what makes up that 4.5% increase of about $954,000 right now, we do have the pension assessment on both the school and town side. So that is an actual increase. It's 0.6%, which is very good news. So it's that budget is $6.72 million for FY25. Health insurance, this number is still an estimate only. We're estimating 8.3% increase right now. GIC should be having meetings late February, early March. And again, as soon as that number comes in as actuals, we'll be updating the budget to reflect that. The current waste collection services or trash budget, we have an estimate of 7.7, which is approximately $136,000 increase. And then just the other items that make that up include $108,000 increase over the FY24 number. I will now move on to the overall proposed budget. So sort of I've been building up to this throughout the whole presentation. We have the municipal, which fits into the operating budget, which fits into the proposed overall budget. And there are really two major sides or categories that make up this overall budget. It's the revenue sources and then any projected expenditures. So on the revenue side, we have taxes, which is the largest piece. I'll go through that. State aid, we do have an updated number on that. What we're estimating for local receipts, our sewer enterprise fund, meals and hotel tax, and free cash. On the expenditure side, we have the major portion of what we call our operating budget, which makes up Appendix D at town meeting. Our capital articles, the stabilization fund allocation that we do, and the OPEB trust fund, as well as state and county charges. So the overall budget is a comprehensive plan that includes, as I said, the operating budget, capital, liabilities, and reserves. So within the operating budget, this is just a breakdown of the different percentage increases over the current year. I went through that. For schools, it's at 3.7. I know you'll be hearing more about that later. The municipal side, 5.1, and then fixed costs, 4.5. On the base capital, it has been level funded. It's around the same numbers as the previous year, about the 1.3 million for the municipal side and $1 million on the school side, both funded with free cash. The supplemental capital budgets include 3 categories with their own funding sources. Additional capital, which this year includes 2 projects that make up $550,000 funded with meals and hotel tax. The sewer capital improvements, this year is about $750,000. That's funded with sewer retained earnings. And then what we call the other capital improvements specific to the ambulance account. So that amount for FY25 right now in the article is $120,000, and that is funded with ambulance receipts. For liabilities and reserves, what we've done in the previous years, we're continuing to do for FY25. For the town's financial policies, we're allocating $125,000 of free cash to the stabilization fund, and also contributing $1.565 million of taxation to the OPEB trust fund. And I'm going to sort of break down, I'll go through each of these specific revenue sources and what the accounts look like right now and how they relate to the budget. And then lastly, there are 3 projects that would require borrowing, and I will go through and update this specifically on this a little bit later, because this is a new development since the last time I presented the capital budget to you in January. So the 3 projects are the fire department squad vehicle, the high school roof restoration, and the Conant Road culvert construction project. And the overall proposed budget as being presented tonight is currently balanced. So on the expenditure side and all the pieces that relate to that, the FY25 proposed expenditures budget is $122.8 million, which is a 1.5% increase over FY24. And I just went through the 5 main categories that account for this increase: operating, capital, OPEB, stabilization, what we call prior year and other articles, and then charges assessed by the state and county. This is more of a breakdown of those numbers. I just put it out there. It's a lot of detail. I went through the majority of this already. The municipal budget, the benefits fixed cost, sewer, debt service, that all accounts for that $116 million we've been talking about for the operating budget, capital, other appropriations, and that all comes to the magic number of $122.8 million for the expenditure budget for FY25. This is a breakdown specifically of the capital budget, and I do have a few slides after this just showing how those articles are currently made up for each of the categories. I am going to go through them pretty quickly just because we met about 2 weeks ago with the capital subcommittee, which I thought was a very productive meeting. We went through a lot of the questions specifically with DPW, police, and fire. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end, but I'm just going to sort of quickly go through these. So the $1.3 million for the municipal base capital, what we call article, the $1 million for the school base capital, the sewer capital improvements, that's at $750,000 we talked about, the other capital improvements for ambulance, that $120,000, which is their normal upgrade and replacement for ambulances, and then an added cardiac monitor for this year. The additional capital article, which is funded by meals and hotel tax for FY25. It's the 2 main projects there are generator upgrades and then the acoustic tiles project at the pool for the recreation department. And then I will just quickly go into a little bit more detail on this slide. It is what we call potential borrowing projects. There are currently 3 of them. These would become 3 different articles. And the newer one on here since the last time I presented is this DPW Conant Road Culvert Construction Project. So at the select board meeting on February 5th, the board voted to make these 3 projects the budget articles 11, 12, and 13. And the Conant Road Culvert project has been in the works. It's been in the 5-year capital plan. However, it was slated for FY26. It was moved up over the last couple of weeks. There was conversations about this, and it has been moved up to the FY25 budget as a borrowing article due to the opportunity for a reimbursable grant opportunity, which is great. This project was funded in 2022 on the design portion of it. And we now have the chance, our DPW director does a great job with reaching out for grants, and he has applied for a 75% reimbursement grant opportunity. But in order to get that, just due to timing, we would have to have that project approved at town meeting in May.
Yeah, George, just let me jump in here. The Conant Road culvert construction was not on our agenda at the capital subcommittee meeting. So rather than belabor any discussion about that, why don't I get with Stephanie and my subcommittee, and we can flesh out something on that and present it to the whole commission when we do our subcommittee report.
That's fine.
Absolutely. Great.
Yep.
The stabilization fund. So this is what we call the town, I should say, I'll move on from capital now. I'm going to focus on the other pieces of the expenditure budget. So one of those is that each year in the towns we call main reserve account, the stabilization fund. We allocate $125,000 of free cash to this. It helps mitigate budget disruptions due to any kind of economic decline. It's also very important for our current AAA credit rating. Also, each year, we allocate money towards what we call the OPEB Liability Trust Fund. We are currently on target with the funding plan for this account. The proposed appropriation for FY25 is $1.565 million, which is in line with the $25,000 increase over FY24. The trust fund account balance as of December of 2023 is $21 million. So that was sort of all the pieces of the expenditure side of the budget. I'm now going to move on and hit the revenue, what makes up the revenue budget on the overall. So for FY25, the projected revenue budget, obviously since it's balanced, matches our expenditure budget of $122.8 million, or a 1.5% increase over FY24. There are 8 major categories. Taxes, of course, the town's main revenue source, state aid, the sewer enterprise fund, local receipts, available funds, prior year, other articles, meals and hotel tax, and free cash, or what we call the town's retained earnings. So the largest piece of this revenue budget is our tax revenue. Taxes are approximately 82% of our revenue. It's the most important component of the town's financial stability. Proposition 2.5, I know I've talked about this a lot, but it does limit the total property taxes a community can raise. We can only increase 2.5% plus new growth. And this calculation is not applied to an individual tax bill. It's really what the town as a whole can raise in tax revenue year over year. So town meeting can approve also a debt exclusion, which allows for additional property taxes to be levied in an amount equal to that debt service payment associated with the project, which is what recently happened with the new school construction. So that's also baked into that formula. For FY25, the projected property tax revenue supporting the overall budget is about $100 million, which includes that exempt debt. I see 2 hands raised. Do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I had a question, Stephanie. Would it be a fair answer when people ask me why their taxes went up 10%? Would it be a fair answer for me to reply to those people that the assessed value on their house went up, which is why their taxes went up? Because
Sure. Sorry, go on.
Because some people, got like an 8% increase. Some people got like a 12% increase. I have one person even told me they got a 20% increase. Now, I think the person that did the 20%, their math may have been wrong, but would it be a fair response when they asked me that, for me to say something to them along the lines of, well, the assessed value of your house went up, the tax rate per thousand didn't change, but the valuation on your house went up, therefore your taxes went up.
So, yes, and I do see, Rob, do you want to jump in, or I have this
I
next slide
actually
I can
have a
go through.
really simple visual to help you explain that, George. So if you don't mind, Stephanie, if I
No.
could just share my screen, because George, I've been asked that very question a number of times, and that's why I put this visual together. So give me a moment to pull it up. Let's go.
Technology is great when it works, I know.
No, this will work fine. So let's go share screen. We'll go up here. Let's go to this and share that. We're gonna put this into slideshow mode. All right. So let me get rid of all of us and bring us down here. And let's go over here and let me go back a few slides here. Okay.
So
So
this is not just me hearing these people ask. Everybody's been asking this.
yes, I've heard it a number of times. I've taken a number of phone calls on this very topic. So let me just sort of try to break it down. You've heard Stephanie say, we're bound by Prop 2.5. Well, what that means is the total tax levy can only increase by 2.5% plus new growth, plus whatever we as a community vote. So in this case, the Pine Hill. So when you look at that, it's 2.5%, plus we conservatively estimate about 0.5% for new growth. And then the Pine Hill Elementary School accounted for about 5%. So you say, well, then things should have gone up by 8%.
Which is what sorry to jump in, Rob, which is what when the tax bills originally went out in the first quarter, that was the estimated increase that we had at the time, just because we had not done our full reval or gotten certified new growth in. So, yep.
So here's your core question, George. So why did it go up 12%? We have a split tax rate that I'll talk about in a half a second, which means the commercial property pays a higher share of the overall tax bill. The tax rate is simply nothing more than the total tax levy, which, as we said, can only go up by 2.5% plus new growth and whatever we as a community vote. And that you divide it by the total assessed value of all of the commercial and residential property taxes combined. So last year, right, residential accounted for about 85% of the assessed value, and the other 15% was the commercial side. Every year, the Board of Assessors presents to us in the Select Board a tax shift factor, which can range anywhere from 1, which means if it were 1, the tax rate would be the same, commercial and residential, all the way up to 1.75. So we applied a 1.7 shift factor, which means even though commercial only accounts for 15% of the assessed values, they were paying roughly 26% of the tax bill. Okay, so that provides a relief to us as residents. If you look at this year, because residential values went up 3 times faster than commercial values, residential values went up on average 25%, commercial went up 8%. That meant commercial value as a percent of the total assessed value dropped to 13%.
Excuse me, Rob, you said the residential value increased 3 times, which represented about 25%, did you say?
So home values, assessed home values went up by about 25%.
Jesus.
And commercial values went up about 8%. So when you look at that, that shrinks the part of the pie that is commercial
Yep.
to 13%. We upped the shift factor to 1.72. We didn't go fully to 1.75 because we want to make sure we have levers in the future to be able to provide relief. But that shift only took the 22% took the commercial value to 22%, which, as you remember in the previous slide, was 26%. So that 4% shift means residents are picking up the extra portion of that. So I've said many, many times that, new growth, specifically commercial new growth, is really important. It's critical to our future. So I hope that's helpful to you in explaining, because I know, I've talked with a couple folks on this call who've asked me the same question, and I've talked with several residents who asked the same question. So I just thought I would throw that together for tonight because it's just a visual that helps explain the math.
And I think the easy 15-second explanation is it was an 8% growth, 8%, plus it was the house's valuation, the town of Weston went up by 25%.
Okay, but let me do this. Let me recognize. I got Jim Ferrara, and then I think I have Chris Paredes hands up. So let me go.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jim.
Chris, are you following up on this discussion? Because I'm going to change it. So if you want to carry on.
Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it doesn't explain mathematically what happened, but I can say from my own experience, George, I've owned a house in this town for 40 years. All 40 years have been subject to Proposition 2.5. And my experience has been that every 20 years, my tax bill doubles. So if you go back to when I first bought the house and what I was paying taxes at that year, go forward 20 years, I paid twice as much. Come forward another 20 years to this year, it's about twice as much. So we can expect as a town, I believe, in planning out in the future, every 20 years, your tax bill is going to double, no matter what 2.5 does.
I want to go, and I think I've got Jim. Is there anybody else on this point, or Jim, do you want to go to some other point?
Yeah, so actually, two questions. The easy one, Stephanie, is what attributed to the decrease in the sewer enterprise revenues?
It's not a decrease in the revenue. It's just we allocate on the revenue side the same amount that is needed on the expenditure side for that account, because it's an enterprise fund. So it's fully funded, operating, all that is fully funded through the enterprise fund. So it just is in line with what they need on the operating side for their budget.
Okay. And then just to follow up to the prior discussion, Mr. Gotti, maybe I watched the long range planning presentation regarding future growth. There didn't seem to be a lot of plans. It was potential, but nothing specific about future commercial growth. I see a lot of development about residential growth, and unfortunately, residential growth is
You're right. You're right,
taking
Jim.
the revenue.
Well, yeah, and you're right. And one of the challenges that we have is that we only have about 6% of our land here in town that is zoned for commercial. So we don't have large swaths of land like we did when we had University Avenue to provide an influx of significant new growth. And so from here forward, it's going to take redevelopment of existing properties, potential overlay districts. So, I mean, we have a challenge ahead of us.
Okay, do I see any other questions? I don't. I just want to make sure I'm picking up because we're on the presentation slide. If not, Jim, are you all still up?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm looking for the button to take it down.
Okay. All right, Stephanie, I think you can continue.
All right, I promise there's not much left. Okay, so I'm not going to go over this too much because I think Rob just did a great job of sort of backing into this, but that $100 million number that I said is what's sort of on the revenue side budgeted for tax it comes from our tax levy capacity. So that includes the prior year tax levy limit with all updated new growth numbers, plus that 2.5% that we always talk about, plus the estimated new growth, which we always do conservatively. Then it adds in that exempt debt number, the payment that we'll be having due to the project and any exempt debt that is out there. comes that $100 million number. So sort of as Rob was getting at, an increase in taxes, even if taxes are higher, we still are only increasing our tax budget by that 2.5% plus new growth, plus any exempt debt. State aid. So I gave an update to the select board on this on February 5th. We were able to get the governor's preliminary budget for FY25 for state aid. It's an important piece of our revenue source. It is 6.6% of the total revenue budget. The projected number based on the preliminary estimate from the governor for FY25 is a total of $8.1 million. There are different categories that break down state aid. It's Chapter 70, which was about a 0.9% increase over FY24, 63,000. The unrestricted municipal side of the budget, which was an increase of $26,000 or 3%. And then we call other, it's restricted to the library, other sources. So that totals that $8.1 million for state aid, which is about $108,000 increase over FY24, a 1.3% increase. And then on the charges side, a little bit of good news, we went down in our assessed charges. So that helps the budget out a little bit. It's a $3,500 decrease from FY24. Free cash is another important piece of our revenue sources. Certified by the DOR as of June 30th, 2023. It's at that $10.9 million number. I know I presented this to you before when we got our certified free cash, but I just wanted to give a little background on specifically for the upcoming town meeting and the special town meeting that just passed and how that affects that number. So $2.1 million of free cash was appropriated through Article 1 at the special town meeting in January. For the annual town meeting FY25 budget, we are estimating $3.2 million of free cash to fund both the school and municipal base capital articles, the allocation for the stabilization fund, and then $732,000 for reserves and fixed costs. That includes $405,000 for the FinCom reserve, $155,000, which is a piece of the select board reserve, and then the unemployment piece of fixed costs being funded through free cash. On the meals and hotel tax side, another source for us on the revenue side, it must be appropriated by town meeting. It requires a 2/3 vote to be used. And historically, and for our financial policies, these funds have been used for capital projects. So for the May 2024 town meeting, it includes a usage of $550,000 of funds. Those two projects I mentioned, the generator upgrades at the municipal buildings, as well as the replacement of acoustic tiles at the town pool. And these charts just show the most recent revenue stream from the meals side and then the hotel side. We've been doing really well. We've definitely bounced back after COVID, as you can see, FY21, 22, and 23, 21, 22, and 23, it's growing. The year to date so far is also on track to be good for FY24. The balance in that account as of December of 2023 is $1.1 million. And I know you have your hand up, Chris. I just have one more slide if that's okay. And then, so just next steps in the budget cycle. At the February and March meetings, I'll continue to update and review the FY25 revenue projections. That includes any update to the FY25 state aid budget, continue review of the expenditures I talked about, as in particular, the assessments from Blue Hills and MWRA, as well as when the GIC comes out with the final health insurance numbers. I'll also continue to update with any capital budget articles. And then the other two big pieces are Articles 1 and 2, which what we call the FY24 budget supplements. So Article 1 is transfers from one budget to another to clean up the current year. And Article 2 is supplemental budget with additional funds. That could be free cash, ambulance receipts. The select board will finalize these articles mid-March in advance of the FinCom's final public hearing. And then any updates between now and the public hearings will be presented to the FinCom. And that's
So Stephanie, I think you've told us this before, for the benefit of everyone else and refresh my recollection. What accounts for the $3 million bump in free cash that we got this year? If you look at the increase in certified free cash over the time, it looks like this is out of out of proportion to previous increases.
Yeah, sure. There was no issues with the closeout of FY '23 because the two main pieces that go towards certifying our free cash are anything that's left over and closed out at the end of FY '23 as far as the operating budgets for the different departments, and then anything we estimated for local receipts or revenue sources, anything that came in above that also gets closed out to free cash. So there was no issues with the closeout of FY '23. The big piece was two pieces, which is that at the last annual town meeting, we used more meals and hotel tax to fund certain articles as opposed to free cash. And then also our investment income during FY '23 was really good. The rates were good, and we also had more cash sitting in the bank just due to the borrowing from the Pine Hill construction project.
Jim Farrow?
Did Rob want to follow up on that before I?
No, I
Go
was
in a
just gonna
different
say that was the one time that, you know, the rate increases associated with the inflation kind of worked in our favor because we had a lot of money sitting in the bank for Pine Hill before we started paying the bills for the school. We were earning a very attractive interest rate. So that was really the driver of that delta, Chris.
Jim?
Stephanie, just some random questions. Regarding the state aid, you gave a number of about 8.1%. I know the state's having a little trouble. How concrete is the state aid?
So the number for FY '25 right now is 8.1 million, which is about a 1.3% increase. That's a preliminary number from the governor. That's what we're basing our increase on right now. I know that everything they've talked about has been current year cuts to certain budgets. I don't see anything coming out about the FY '25 numbers and having that cut back. It was, especially on the Chapter 70 side, that is definitely at least the minimum $30 per student that you need to have. So I don't foresee that being cut back.
Okay. You also talked about a addition of a DPW worker, the HVAC tech. Will
Yes.
he be only on the municipal side, or will he also be on the school side?
Right now, we're just including that in the municipal budget on the municipal side as a
But will
position.
he service or review the school HVAC systems? We see a lot of capital expenditures coming down for the school roof and HVAC systems. Are we going to be able to double up on him, or is that a totally different budget issue?
It is sort of a budget issue, and it's also definitely a collaboration that would need to happen between our facilities director and the school facilities director. I do know that the school has contracted services that they utilize for HVAC. I don't know if it's something that they would potentially look at decreasing on that end in order to add on their salary side and do a split. We do have that with the electrician currently. We have a split between the school and the town side for our on-staff electrician, but for right now, this HVAC tech position is just in the municipal budget.
Okay, and one more. So on the free cash, if my math was correct, there's about $5 million left in there.
About that, that does not include, I will just say, what we don't yet have numbers for anything in Article 2 that will require funding of free cash, but that's just for the base and what's planned right now for town meeting, yes.
Okay, and then, so the Conant Road project at the $1.5 million is going out for borrowing, but there's a possibility that we'll get 75% back. That 75% will go into free cash, the money that comes back.
No, it would sort of be, we get authorization to borrow for that project. And, you know, best case scenario, our DPW director gets that grant. We start construction during FY '25. We have to do something within that fiscal year as far as borrowing those funds. We would just wait till the project is completed and borrow what is needed to close out anything, the difference between the reimbursement and what we have for expenses.
So you'd borrow less, is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, then with $5 million in free cash, would it be better to use that free cash instead of borrowing any money? Maybe that's a select board question, but I mean, we're, according to Mr. Gaudi's prior presentation, we're soon to be hitting our borrowing limits with the fire station and other projects. So should we be limiting our borrowing?
It fits what we would need to borrow for that project in the annual because it would be non-exempt debt, it would be within our debt service budget. We can afford it, and it's a project that definitely qualifies for borrowing. It's a capital expenditure. These projects could be funded through free cash, just sort of balancing what we're using free cash for this year already and the potential of what's coming up at town meeting. And then also adhering to our policies of keeping that, which right now is about $4.2 million of free cash available in case of emergencies or if needed. This project specifically really does fall within a borrowing article.
Right, but it falls within keeping our free cash at the $4.2 million limit too.
If we have nothing else come up at town meeting that needs that appropriation.
Are we looking at other plans for the free cash?
Well, just as an example, last year we had to fund a good amount of Article 2 with any overages of overtime for different departments. If the school department has something that comes up during the year, last year we put some towards their special education reserve fund. It's just I always keep in the back of my mind that we potentially come March might have a different number there listed as far as what we're utilizing at town meeting for free cash.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from FinCom members? All right, I just had one narrow question, Stephanie. If we don't, I mean, you probably don't have an answer for this, but if we don't solve the recycling problem, I think in the presentation the DPW suggested we would get hit with a penalty. Do we have any idea how much that penalty is in the trash collection?
I don't know. Do you mean each time there's an issue with the recycling
No, I think but in
disposal?
the DPW made, we failed our recycling test, so that if we don't, we had this DPW presentation about all the steps we got to do, but if we don't correct it, I think we're subject to some type of fine from Waste Management. And I was curious how much that was. You don't have to answer that right now, but I'm curious. It is, yeah, whatever it is. Okay.
It's a number I can definitely get back to you on, and I know there is a fine. I just don't know what it is,
That's
but I will
okay,
get back to
Stephanie. I
you.
just want to make sure, I get some idea what it is. Okay. Does
Yeah, George,
anybody else have
George,
any-
I was under the impression that the rates will go up if the contamination rates don't decline. And I think, I actually don't know, Stephanie, if they've quantified that dollar amount, and if it's just more of a, hey, we really need to do better, or we're gonna face increased fees.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, Stephanie, whenever you get that would be great. No rush. Any other questions, comments? All right, do you want to then go to the select board warrant articles?
So I have that as part of my presentation. I can share my screen. I'm not sure who, Mary Ann or Chris? Is that okay? Yep, okay. All right, Chris.
And thank you for the first part of your presentation, Stephanie.
Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to the select board at their February 5th meeting did vote to use miscellaneous Article 4 to create select board Article 13. Excuse me, and that's to adopt a fee schedule for the ceiling of weights and measures. And just by background for the FinCom and those listening, at the select board January 22nd meeting, they authorized the town to enter into an agreement with Norfolk County to perform those services. Previously, the town was in a contract with the Commonwealth to perform those services. And after meeting with the county, we feel confident that they will provide the same, if not better service at a reduced price. And as part of that process, one of the things that we noticed was we have a fee schedule that is pursuant to the Massachusetts general laws and really not factoring in the actual cost of the services. So we are proposing a fee schedule over a 4-year period, a tiered approach to get that fee schedule to something that we're seeing other communities are charging for these services. And just by way of example, on the, sorry, is there a chart on, is that page 36? Does that show the chart? Thank you very much. So if you look at the chart which says scale 0 to 10, and what we're proposing in fiscal year or calendar year 24, excuse me, is $6.67. That under the Massachusetts general law is showing at $2. So we are far off, and then the scale for 10 pounds to under 100 pounds or up to 100 pounds is showing at $3 and we're proposing 10. So we are looking at the fee structure. We did also watch the presentation at Long Range Financial Planning and our conversations with the FinCom in the past regarding fees. We know that the school department increased some fees in the past. This is something that is going to address some of the costs, as well as the administrative costs for providing the services being lower to the community than they were when we were partnering with the Commonwealth.
Okay, any questions on this? Okay, you want to move on to the next one, Chris?
Yeah, George, hang on a second.
Okay.
I will, this seems like an appropriate time as any for me to make my pitch that one of the things I think we should look into is making sure that the measurement of electricity for electric vehicle charging stations is accurately sealed and measured. And then the town could charge for that service as well as charge for the consumption of electricity from electric vehicle charging stations. No matter how small, I think the town owes its residents some security that the town's electric vehicle charging stations are being used by town vehicles or town residents. We can certainly charge for the use of the parking space, but what I don't want to see happen is somebody come from out of town, park in front of the Wentworth meeting hall, library, all day, plug their electric vehicle in, and go take a train into Boston. That seems to me to be antithetical of what Westwood wants to do with its electric vehicle charging stations. So any type of revenue that we can get from that, even if it costs money to get that revenue, at least we're not giving away electricity, because I really don't think that that's what's in the best interest of the residents. And I'll get off my soapbox.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll look into if under Massachusetts general laws, the seal of weights and measures does seal for electric charging stations. I'm not aware of that at this time, but I can certainly look into that.
Thank you, Chris.
And if I might just add, I believe Chris Coleman, when Tom Philbin was in, we did talk about making sure that those had the capability to charge. And I mean, not the car, but the fee.
Okay. All right, next article, Chris, unless there are any other questions?
Mr. Chair, that's the last change from the previous presentation to the FinCom. So the select board did take total of 4 miscellaneous articles, voted those, and Stephanie went over 3, and I just went over the 4th one. The other articles are as previously submitted.
Do we have we had an update? Are there any updates on those articles?
So the board will be discussing those articles at their meeting on February 26th. And we'll be asking the board to vote on those articles. There are ongoing conversations regarding some of those articles that the board will be updated on at their meeting on the 26th of February.
Right now, those other articles have not been voted on by the select board. Is that correct?
Not all the articles, correct.
Okay, the reason I'm asking that, Chris, is if we get any, when we go to public comment, if we get any questions on those and the article's not finalized, I'm basically going to defer to the select board, okay?
Okay. Well, just to be clear, the reason why I'm saying that is because they did vote on the miscellaneous articles. So I don't want to say all articles, they voted on none, but they did vote on some. They haven't voted on all.
Okay. All right, I think that's fine. Are there any other questions from FinCom members on the select board article that was just updated? Okay. I'd like to thank Stephanie, as usual, for all of your work you've done. I'll repeat what I said at the beginning, that it's a very, very tight year. And I really want the subcommittees, when they look at their respective operating budgets, to really come back and tell us, yeah, it is a balanced budget, and we have funded what we have to fund, but we not overcut where we shouldn't cut, because I think there's a lot of pressure to find ways of funding this. I think one way we can make citizens feel comfortable with their tax increases is giving an assurance that it's a tightly managed budget. So hopefully we'll get that done. But Stephanie, thank you so very much for all the work you put into this, okay?
Thank you all.
All right, with that, I don't see any other questions, so it's a time to welcome the presenters from the school committee and school membership. Are they, Victoria, are you gonna let them in?
Yes.
So it'll be the superintendent, and we have, is the school committee joining us too?
No, only Tony Mullen and
Tony's the
Lemma.
chair.
and
Okay, all right.
Tim's been-
All right, so Tony's the chair. Welcome to Tony,
George.
as the Director of Finance and Administration, and then Tim is obviously the superintendent. So let's welcome them.
George, point of
Yeah.
order. Does the select board need to close out their meeting?
Thank
This
you very,
point?
very much.
Mhm.
Mary Ann, do you need to close out your meeting or do you close it out at the end?
Hold on, I need to move her back in.
Okay. Is she back in? Mary Ann, do you need to close out your meeting now or do you want to wait to the end?
I'm back. Let's see. Probably makes sense to close out our meeting now.
Okay.
Unless,
Motion to adjourn our select board meeting, Madam Chair.
thank you.
Is Joe back in so he can second?
You're muted, Joe.
I'm working on, and Rob, that was a great presentation. Thank you. I'll second the motion.
Great. Roll call. Joe,
Aye.
Rob,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Nice job, Rob.
Thanks for the committee member to keeping us in order. Okay, so let's go. Tim, welcome, and Lemma, welcome, and Tony, welcome. So it's all yours.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, George. I appreciate it. Thank you to the members of the commission for having us here today. I'm just going to jump right in, and similarly, I want to offer my thanks to all the members of my team for their work on this. And Tony and Lemma, obviously feel free to jump in at any point. Victoria, I don't know if I have screen sharing. It looks like I do, so that's good. So I'm similarly going to share my screen with my presentation here. So hopefully folks can see that. And so I'm just going to jump on in. So this is obviously my first time presenting the budget formally here to the Finance and Warrant Commission. So I just want to start with a little background on how we built it this year. And we had previewed some of this at the October school committee meeting, and I think I talked about this when I met the commission earlier in the fall. Our budget priorities are always going to be informed by what our district goals and our strategic priorities are. Those for this year were approved by the school committee back in September. We had a highlighted priority at that point about hiring a director of human resources. We've been able to build that into this year's budget. That's been a priority of the committee for many years, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. They were also informed by the findings of my entry plan as superintendent. I spent the first few months on the job trying to meet as many people in the community as I could, presented those findings in November, and other priorities from the committee. Our annual drivers, and this is going to be the same pretty much every single year, we have to meet our contractual salary obligations. We have to meet other inflation impacted costs. One of the big things was we need to make sure that we maintain reasonable class sizes to ensure educational efficacy. Special education is the most volatile part of any budget. We need to make sure we address those needs, and we need to continue to make progress on our educational goals. So the entry plan that I presented in November, and I know I have not spoken to the commission since I presented that to the school committee, identified really high levels of student achievement, high quality teaching administrative support staff, and robust levels of community support. So in building this budget, we weren't starting from scratch. We wanted to start from what was a really solid school system, make sure we were able to commit the financial resources required to maintain that existing educational and personnel infrastructure, but then be really strategic about additions and reductions that were aligned with our goals and priorities. This is very similar to Stephanie's side, and I know she Stephanie's slide. I know she mentioned that we had one of these, so I'll mention hers. Education is a people business. You need individuals working with kids to help them learn. So 85% of our budget is salaries, and 70% of the salary budget is teachers. So in terms of the FY25 budget, the biggest driver are those contractual salary obligations. Unlike last year's budget at this time, we have much greater clarity as most of our contracts are settled through the end of FY25. In particular, the big unknown last year, as I mentioned, 70% of salaries are teachers. Teachers' contract is settled unlike a year ago. But we also have cost escalation in other areas. Transportation continues to escalate, particularly in what's a non-competitive bidding climate in the state. The state had a transportation commission a couple of years ago that made some recommendations that really haven't gotten any traction, unfortunately. And then special education, both non-salary and salary. So when we looked at those cost drivers, the financial impact of a level services budget for the school department for FY25 was 3.77%. And so when we built this budget, we were actually able to build a budget that allowed us to move forward on priorities with an increase of 3.69% below that level services percentage of 3.77. And this is more consistent with what you had seen in previous years, knowing that FY24 was a spike in the school department budget. As I mentioned, this allows us to make programmatic changes consistent with our priorities while maintaining the important fiscal responsibility we have to the community, and with that number of just over 56.7 million. George, I should mention, obviously, if people want to jump in and ask questions along the way, as they did with Stephanie, I think that's better than letting me go through all the slides at once, if that works for you.
That's fine, Tim. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So this shows you what our operating budget percent increases have been over the last 10 years or so. 16 and 17 were those university station years that were much bigger. There was the increase that happened last year with the Chapter 70 increase that came in. And then you can see we're back on a little more consistent with where we'd been for previous fiscal years. So that FY24 budget, we've broken it out in this budget a little bit differently than we have in other budgets, which talked about salary and non-salary. For us, we wanted to make sure that we highlighted that there were some changes with the Pine Hill consolidation. And you can see a net reduction of 4 FTE to the tune of just over $250,000. Some other staff changes that offset that, and some net increases to various non-salary counts. The net change is only a 0.7 FTE add, and that $2 million that's just under 3.7%. These are the categories in the operating budget. Again, most of it is in salaries. You have a decent amount in special education. Utilities, we have a little offset that helps us there, and some other non-salary accounts. And then this is just what it looks like with all funds, including grants and revolvers and offsets. So the big thing that drives us in the school department when we build our budget is enrollment considerations. We need to be responsive to any fluctuations in our enrollment changes. And so for FY25, we didn't see any enrollment changes at the high school or middle school level that has any significance on staffing levels. But we have seen a steady rise over the last couple of years in elementary enrollment. So since a low point in FY21, and some of that obviously would have been COVID induced as well, if as individuals chose other educational options or just weren't coming to school at that point, we've increased 72 students at the elementary level in the last 2 years. And we've also seen a challenge with the use of census data to predict incoming kindergarten enrollment. And this current school year provided a dramatic break in our previous trends, which you can see on this slide. So for the 4 previous years, and I don't have data prior to those 4 previous years, this is pulled out of previous budget reports, but we were, right around 2021, we were closer to 30. But in terms of the difference between who was identified in the town census for kindergarten students and how many students came into our doors in October, and really in the fall, October 1 is what we report to the state, those numbers were pretty consistent. For this year, it more than tripled. And so we had to make adjustments on the fly in this year's budget. Most notably, we reduced a class at the Deerfield campus of Pine Hill in 5th grade. We had to add a kindergarten at Martha Jones. And we also had to add an instructional aide to support that kindergarten classroom at MJ as well. And so as we built this budget, we wanted to make sure that we were conservative in looking at kindergarten enrollment so that we weren't caught flat-footed by what may be a new trend that may be a spike, but we want to make sure that we address this appropriately. So again, as I just mentioned, we proceed conservatively on that front. And then when we look at classroom sections in each building, the guidance from the school committee is 18 to 22 students in grades K to 3, 18 to 24 students in grades 4 through 5. And when we look holistically at the district as a whole across all now 4 buildings, the projected enrollment for FY25 shows no net change in the number of classrooms from FY24. I'll talk about Pine Hill in a second. We will see a reduction in 1 section at Downey. We will see an addition of 1 section at Martha Jones, but from a global district budget perspective, that has no net impact. This is what this looks like by school. I want to point out in particular here, I should say the enrollment by grade level for each school is there. What's in parentheses is the number of classrooms. The one that stands out as a little bit of an interesting thing is Downey has 2.5. For a number of years now, we have had a split classroom where the classroom is half grade K students, half grade 1 students. It is not the ideal educational situation. The teacher who has been there has done a remarkable job for a number of years, and this is has partly been a product of space at Downey, which is able to be alleviated through Pine Hill, and the movement of the WABA program from Downey to Pine Hill. But it's also a product of financial considerations. So if our kindergarten enrollment is lower than we are projecting, and we're projecting at a conservative level, the very first thing that we would do is we would eliminate that 2.5, that K1 split at Downey, and create 3 grade 1s and either 2 or 3 grade Ks, depending upon how many students that we have. So we would just reinvest that resource if our numbers are lower than what we're projecting right now. So I'm going to pause there for a second, just if there's any questions before I jump into Pine Hill consolidation.
Tim, I don't see any questions, so let's
Then
go.
I will keep plowing ahead. So,
Thank you, sir.
so in terms of the Pine Hill consolidation, when I went back and looked at previous iterations of the budget, there was talk about anticipated reductions in classroom sections. When I looked at the FY24 budget documents, we talked about potentially saving, being able to reduce 2 teaching positions due to that consolidation. One of those actually talked about was already taken in FY24, but had to be reinvested at MJ because of the increased elementary enrollment. The other one is just not able to be actualized, again, because of this increased elementary enrollment. So we were not able to find any savings in individual classroom consolidation. That being said, we knew that we needed to look in other areas as well. So one of those areas was in administrative costs. And then one of those areas, we were going to look at some programmatic redesign because we were able to find efficiency in our elementary specials around essentially, transportation, or not transportation, travel time consolidation by combining the Hanlon and Deerfield campuses into one, and then looking overall at that approach. We then took advantage of the fact that we were looking at this to move forward with the strategic programmatic redesign on our elementary specials that I'll talk about in a minute. But the net reduction here is 4 FTE and $268,000 of savings that is either directly or indirectly related to the Pine Hill consolidation. So the first of those, actually, this is just the itemized list. I know you have this in the budget book, so I'm not going to go through each of these one by one until I talk about them in context. So in administrative cost savings, there's 3 parts. One is that there is currently an interim assistant principal in Pine Hill, Donna Olson, who's done a fantastic job on that role. But as we move into the new building, and in one building, we are going to, when we post that job, reduce it from a 12-month position to a 10-month position, capture a little bit of cost savings there. So similarly, because of the reduction of travel time, we're going to be able to reduce a 0.2 FTE in our special education department head. And there's currently an administrative assistant at both Hanlon and Deerfield. We'll be reducing that to 1, knowing that in terms of at least a physical body, there's also somebody moving from our offices here at Central over to Pine Hill in that main office space. In terms of some programmatic consolidation savings, we're able to reduce 1 FTE in building-based substitutes. We currently have 1 in each of our 5 buildings, plus an extra one that has been allocated to Downey related to special education programming that's moving to Pine Hill. So we are able to reduce 1 of those and find savings in the FY25 budget. We're also able to reduce a 1.0 SLPA, speech language pathologist assistant, which was related to a 1-year spike in enrollment that we're able to capture through that programmatic savings. There's a redesign that has a little bit of savings, but is more about being proactive instead of reactive regarding our mental health and SEL support. So there is currently a psychologist at both our Hanlon and Deerfield campuses and no adjustment counselor. Each of our other elementary schools has a 1.0 psychologist and a 0.4 adjustment counselor. Pine Hill, instead of having 2 psychologists, will have 1 psychologist and 1 adjustment counselor. So it's a little programmatic redesign there. In addition, we knew we needed to take a look at elementary specials. This has been part of our district strategic priorities since at least 2021. The existing special students take 1 day a week in elementary level of art, music, physical education, and library. They have a second special that, depending upon the grade level, is a little bit different. We've just completed the digital literacy and computer science review. This was just presented at the school committee on February 8th, where the only current structured offering on a weekly consistent basis across the district is in grade 3. And so we're committing to continuing to provide high quality instruction in those areas that we already are, but we also want to expand our work in digital literacy and computer science, where that will now be offered as a special to kids every day, or excuse me, once a week, every week in grades 2 through 5. So this is our existing programmatic offerings and the changes you see highlighted here, where we're adding DLCS in grade 5. And then we're making some other adjustments related to grade 1, which is currently art and PE becomes PE to increase physical activity for students. And then in grade 4, we're providing choice for students about music or instrumental music. And then grade 5, we'll rework our curriculum to consolidate, instead of having separate music and chorus and drama classes, consolidating into one. So the net result of this is that we're making that expansion. I think I actually just talked through this slide. But from a budgetary perspective, actually, I'll come back to that in a second. In addition to those programmatic changes, this also allows us the opportunity to increase common preparation time for classroom teachers. So they have the ability to meet with grade level colleagues at a minimum of 3 times per week for all grades, and every day in grades 4 to 5, as well as our ability to capture with this redesign music, physical education, and library for students in our preschool, where we currently have to contract out music at this year. So the net changes, you'll see an addition of a 1.0 instructional technology coach at the elementary level to support the DLCS teaching, but a reduction of a 1.0 music teacher and a 0.8 art teacher. So before I move into other staffing changes, I'll pause there again, George.
Any questions from members of the committee? I do not see any hands here, Tim. Let me just check down below here. Nope. Okay, I think you can proceed.
Thank you. So in terms of other staffing changes, you can see there's some ins and outs here, and I'll break this out into different parts. So the first part is around technology staffing. So we are actually, as we look at the way that we're delivering technology coaching at the middle school level, in last year's budget, we have reduced from a 1.0 to a 0.5. We're taking the rest of that reduction in this year's budget, realizing that it is going to be more effective to have technology facilitator stipends, which are grade level teachers that will support their colleagues in grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, and then one in the arts as well to support their colleagues. So there's some savings in reducing a 0.5 FTE and adding teacher stipends as well. And then in addition, in terms of our tech support model, what we have done historically is that we've deployed tech support people into buildings. We have piloted this year because we had a staff member leave during the year. We're moving to a centralized model for tech support, so that we'll have we can deploy our team through a help test, through a ticket help desk system, and that allows us to reduce a 0.6 FTE, and that pilot has been successful so far this year. In terms of other staffing, I mentioned this up front. This has been a consistent priority for the district to add a 1.0 human resources director. That was also corroborated by our recent equity audit as well. We are finding, and not just here in Westwood, but across the Commonwealth, a significant change in the post-pandemic work climate, a huge increase in staff turnover, particularly among support staff. I know when I had met with the subcommittee the other day, I got asked the question, what is your rate of staff turnover? And the answer, unfortunately, right now is because we don't have an HR director, we can't answer that question in the moment of time we are at right now. What I can say, however, is that at least just since the start of this year, I get an email every time we have a personnel change, whether it's somebody that's moving from one building to another, somebody's being hired as a coach, somebody's exiting, somebody's classified changing. Since I just started on July 1st, I think I've received 366 emails of staffing notifications just since the beginning of this year. So that speaks to kind of the volume, and the person who's doing that role right now is our assistant superintendent, and that's detracting from her job focusing on teaching and learning. It's also aligned with our priority to recruit, hire, and develop staff, and we'll have a role related to district communications as well. Chris, I see your hand up, so
Yeah,
George, I should let you do that, but sorry.
And that's fine.
I know we're going to meet tomorrow by Zoom, but this human resources director is something that is service that you cannot get from the town's existing human resources department.
So we are already relying, and Molly has been a great partner through the town, but the volume of what we do, particularly right now, is way more than what should be placed upon the town. Our current assistant superintendent is probably spending 60 to 70% of her day dealing with human resource functions, which again is taking directly away from the work that we need to do on teaching and learning. It's a volume issue. I mean, we have between, depending upon how you count, whether you count part-time folks or not, we have 600 to 700 employees in the district. And you would never run, I mean, there are a lot of people that say school should be run like a business or municipal government should be run like a business. You would never have a business with this volume of staffing and not have an HR person.
Well, I guess the follow-up question then is, why should the town why should the schools have to hire a human resources director instead of the town adding staff to their existing department?
So there are certain nuances related to school law that are, it requires a specialty in the area of schools. So I think that's one thing, first of all. And I think that while I appreciate the concept, and I think there are places where it's appropriate to have that level of cross-school and municipal collaboration, ultimately from a reporting mechanism, there are some things that it needs to, because there is a sort of a chain of command as it relates to HR functions, particularly when there may be situations where there is a level of strategic, either in a positive way, strategic alignment with hiring practices and goals for the department, or in ways where the HR director is dealing with, say, staff investigations, things like that. To have a reporting structure on the school side is significantly more valuable and effective than having it sit outside of the school department.
Thank you.
I see Jim
George,
Ferrari.
if I can just follow up. Tim, you said you don't have the numbers in actual time, but is it possible to get some idea of what numbers we're dealing with turnover, retention, or HR issues?
Yeah, so the state collects data for, the state collects and publishes data for teachers. And so roughly we've got about I looked up the number the other day, and I'm not going to do it while I'm sharing my screen here, but roughly about a 13% teacher turnover last year. The staff turnover is significantly higher. I think the support staff turnover is significantly higher. One of the challenges with collecting data is the fact that we have systems that don't talk well to each other here, from payroll to a student information database. Those are some larger sort of down the road structural questions around how we manage data in the district and in the district across with the town. I will say on the support staff, one of the big challenges that we have here is those are positions that generally don't pay as well. There is a barrier to the ability to live with geographic proximity to this community with a salary that is lower by the nature of the work. And in a climate where there was a huge influx of money to many municipalities related to the Student Opportunity Act, particularly urban municipalities that were underfunded by the state for many, many years, the number of positions that they've created through the use of SOA funds has meant that there is a much greater supply of jobs out there than there is demand from employees to take those jobs. And so we may have somebody that's will take a job with us because they're traveling 20 to 25 miles to come to work, and a job opens up that's 3 miles away. And they will leave in October and November and January. And it has made it really challenging to have a level of continuity, particularly because when we're talking about IAs or ABA tutors, they're working with some of our neediest kids who need that level of continuity. And so again, one of the challenges is we don't really have a good system for having that raw data right now. We want to put those structures in place so that we have them. But I will tell you, we are actually, I'm fortunate that we're fully staffed right now because many of my colleagues in other districts are not. There's a statewide crisis around particularly the support staff position for kids. But there is more that we can do to get people in the door and try to keep them and retain them. So,
well, let me just back up. I mean, if it's a financial or geographical consideration, the HR director can't overcome that.
that is a factor, right? But if we are able to build out systems that are provide a greater support structure for employees to retain them, that's what they can certainly help with, right? It's not, sometimes it's about money, sometimes it's about working conditions and climate. And the more that we can do to support the climate for those employees, the more we're likely we are to be able to retain them.
And that can only be done with an HR director. It can't be done with your current staffing now.
Not in the system that we currently have. Again, what the work that we're doing is directly taken away from teaching and learning. We have an assistant superintendent whose primary function is to support the teaching and learning in the district, who's spending 60 to 70% of her time doing the HR functions.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other hands,
Oh.
Tim. Okay.
Sorry. Thanks, George. So continue some of our other strategic additions. We are bringing back the librarian at the Thurston Middle School. This position was eliminated in fiscal year 2021. We have a gap where we have librarians at the elementary level. We have a librarian at the high school level. We haven't had one at Thurston. It's a critical position to support students' informational literacy development, sort of the, work through the media landscape, what's true, what's not true, as well as to encourage the love of general literacy. It was identified through the recent library curriculum review, so we're happy to be able to bring that back. And part of that is actually doing work to physically restore the library at Thurston as well. In addition, we're going to be adding a bridge program teacher at the high school. This is for the creation of a therapeutic program at WHS to support at-risk and high-need students to re-engage with school. This may be a student that's out for an extended period of time due to hospitalization, who may have issues with chronic absenteeism. And this is really designed to provide that level of clinical support with the growing mental health needs we're having with kids. It's an investment that can potentially reduce out-of-district referrals as well. There are some additions that are basically non-discretionary due to the requirement of IEPs. So that's a half-time speech pathologist and a 0.3 occupational therapist, which are both dedicated to Thurston primarily, and then 2 additional instructional assistants, again, related to the needs on IEPs. And then the last thing is it's not an FTE ad, but to add stipends for our SEL team leaders. It's related to our commitment to provide support for student social emotional learning. We have those for advisory teachers, advisory leaders at Thurston. This would expand it to our SEL team leaders at the elementary school as well. So I'm going to transition from there to have a conversation around a few different things, starting with special education and then moving to some other areas. So in special education, as I said before, this is the most volatile part of any budget. This is there are 2 things in the FY25 budget that I warned the committee when I presented this initially are not going to be replicable in FY26 and beyond, that were of benefit to us in this year's budget. The first is the savings we are seeing as a result of the consolidation of Pine Hill. That is not going to happen. That's a one-time thing. The second is when you look at that overall net line for special education tuition, despite a 4.7% increase in OSD rates for special education tuition, it's going down from FY24 to FY25 in projection. That I don't think I ever saw that happen in my 11 years in the previous district. The fact that we're seeing it this year is related to just some fluctuations in enrollment. We have an obligation both legally and morally to support any student between the ages of 3 and 22. But occasionally there are changes in enrollment that cause a change here. So tuition is projected to go down by $200,000 next year. We are seeing an increase in special education transportation. Some of this in district is related to a change in the law that requires us to provide transportation for our summer programming. That was done in FY24, but unbudgeted in FY24. So we're playing a little bit of catch up in FY25 to account for in-district programming. The other thing, and I got asked this question by the subcommittee the other day around, why is day tuition up? And there's a continuum of services there. Residential is more restrictive. Day tuition is at least outside placements in the middle, and collaborative is lesser restrictive of those environments. And students may fluctuate depending upon what their needs are. So day tuition is going to be the most costly related to transportation. Obviously, residential students don't have transportation costs. Collaboratives are generally closer, and you can put more students on the same van because there's a larger N. So when day tuition goes up, you'll see some special education transportation costs go up. But that's the transportation cost there. But on a whole, compared to, I know what you would have seen a year ago, the net change in costs related to tuition and transportation is significantly lower than what you would see in a typical year. And I see a question there, George.
Yeah. Hi, Tim. Quick question on this. I was on the subcommittee last year. Did you use the same assumptions when looking at the unexpected inbound students that might need out of town placement?
Yeah, so I mean, I do want to give a ton of credit to Sue Maselli. Sue is our new student services director. Sue has done a phenomenal job this year, and she's a veteran director who came to us into the district. You know, as our approach, generally speaking, is the same with this. You know, we want to make sure that we are somebody that may be in the pipeline that we are concerned about that may result in outside placement. We want to make sure we budget for that as well. And so we have made those assumptions. Again, we are benefiting from some just some demographic changes that happens with age outs, move outs, et cetera. That is not necessarily always going to happen.
Great. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Just moving to the next slide. Sorry, non-salary budget changes. So that was the net increase in tuition and transportation. We also had a little bit of a reduction in our circuit breaker offset. That's just based upon what we took in for FY23 circuit breaker revenues, because everything sort of, excuse me, FY24 circuit breaker revenues, everything sort of lags a year behind on that. We do have an increase in our yellow bus transportation cost. We're in our third year of our contract with Connolly Bus. That's just going to continue to go up. A little bit of an increase in professional development providers. And if you look at our utility budget, you can see there's a reduction in $25,000 in electricity due to an offset from our solar agreement that we have. I will say we are, in terms of our assumptions around what our utility costs will be for this coming year, we've made no net change to our FY25 base budget, excluding the offsets. Part of that is we don't know what Pine Hill is going to bring. We know it is a building that is designed much more efficiently than obviously either Hanlon or Deerfield is, but it's also a bigger building than both of those buildings. We know that what it does for heating and cooling is significantly more efficient, as is electricity, but it's also going to use more electricity as a newer building that has more stuff in it, for lack of a better phrase. So, you know, there are some rebates related to the project, which we know can sort of be there as a contingency to offset an increase that we may see in FY25. But we are level funding the base utility assumptions for FY25, knowing that we're going to have to revisit this once we have some actuals as we build FY26. And then in terms of revenue assumptions, I mentioned circuit breaker, the offset's a little bit lower, and that's just based upon the previous year's receipts. We are proposing, this has proposed, it's now been approved by the school committee, a 3% increase to our bus fees, athletics fees, and preschool tuition fees. I know the committee hadn't touched these numbers for a long time, and then there were some sizable increases last year. We believe that it is a more sustainable model to just build an annual increase and not hit families all at once, and just do that through our revenue process. And I mentioned the solar revenue previously as well. Just any questions before I move into the capital budget?
No, I think you're all set, Tim.
Thanks. Stephanie had shared some of this already as well. So our capital budget is level funded at just over $1 million from FY24. And I know we're meeting with the capital subcommittee tomorrow as well too. We have moved some of the dollar figures around here a little bit. We lowered FF&E, knowing that you know, obviously with Pine Hill coming on board, that has taken care of a number, you know, that essentially took care of 2 previous buildings' FF&E needs, and took care of one. And we are also, anything that is usable out of the Hanlon school or the Deerfield school for that matter, but the Hanlon's a little more time sensitive, we are repurposing elsewhere in the district to make sure that we are doing that in a responsible way. I think the one that stands out to me the most is Downey had to lose their art room a few years ago. So we're repurposing the art room furniture from Pine Hill, or excuse me, from Hanlon, and bringing it over to Downey to make sure that we can bring that back. There is no shortage of needs in the district related to any of these areas. And, you know, I'll talk about sort of what the allocation for FY25 is. Technology, there's a Chromebook replacement cycle for students in grades 6 and 9, new MacBooks for high school teachers, again, on a replacement cycle. Chromebooks has a 3.5-year cycle, laptops 5 years. I talked about FF&E a second ago. So in terms of building improvements in HVAC, we recently did a conditions assessment of our MEP systems. There are some recommended upgrades in those areas: fire and electrical panels, rooftop. You see the list there. We also did a roof moisture study a year ago. There is a prioritization of the Sheehan non-slope roof. We have money in our roofing reserves to handle that project. It would pretty much deplete those reserves. But we also have a restoration project that's needed at the high school. I know that is one of the warrant articles that was talked about previously. That's an estimated cost of $2.5 million. And as I've said, and I said at the high school PTO meeting this morning, it is something that will require a vote. The question of what happens if that vote doesn't pass is that the problem doesn't go away and just costs more a year from now because of construction inflation. The high school is a 20-plus-year-old building at this point. And that's when roof systems, the way that it was designed initially, are scheduled for replacement. So, and we're seeing that with some of the storms that we had earlier this year, what the impacts are. That being said, just before I move off of the slide, it's important for me to point out that we are going into the development of a master facilities plan for the district. That RFQ should be hopefully out on the street shortly. We're doing that in conjunction with the town. There'll be two separate projects, or excuse me, two separate studies, but with a combined procurement that is really going to help us make sure that we prioritize those things in our capital list, and that we are also at the same time looking at what our mid to long range plan for our buildings are, what really needs to come next, so that we wind up not investing money in a project or in a building that may be slated to have something very different happen with it in the future. Essentially, you don't want to invest a ton of resources in a building that requires a much more potential structural change to the way that building is used, or if it exists in the way that it does right now. So that's what that study will be designed to do. I saw a hand pop up and then disappear a second ago. So
Do you have a question? Christina? Okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So one of the things that we've candidly been asking, particularly with respect to this new firehouse, is prioritization of these capital projects. So, the sooner that you can share that with us and that we can start factoring that in our discussions about the new fire station, I'd really appreciate that.
yeah, just so I appreciate that, and again, I want to thank the town has actually been a really great partner too. I want to acknowledge that in this conversation, because we both have the interest in making sure that we do this prioritization. So the timeline for this right now is that the RFQ should hit the street in the next couple of weeks. I know for the school department side that our goals are that we want to engage in our visioning work that we need to do, because what we do with our building should be informed by what we want to do with the education for our students. So the visioning work is scheduled to happen this spring. We'll start to get some draft ideas sort of during the late spring and summer. But the idea is to have a draft report done by October so that it can inform next year's capital budget cycle.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and I will say, in terms of related to that, I would anticipate that we won't have one identified sole master plan. We would have a bunch of options, and then we would need to socialize those options with the community to see, sort of what direction we should be heading in. So
Yeah, just the more kind of information that we have earlier, the better.
yeah, absolutely.
Even if it's not finalized, just so that we can make better decisions.
Thank you. And so the last thing I'll do, there's just two slides here, and thank you for your indulgence with all the slides that I have. This is I can't take credit for the idea of this slide. This has existed previously. This just shows where we sit against the top public high schools on the Boston Magazine rankings. Unfortunately, the state's most recent per pupil spending data is from FY21, so it's a little old. And we will update this when we can, but we sort of fall in that, actually just below the median of that list for what our per pupil spending is. And then just talk about future priorities. I'm really proud of the fact that our FY25 budget was able to address many of the future priorities that we addressed in the that were raised in the FY24 budget. The one that we really couldn't get at was the creation of additional preschool classroom. We just don't have the space for it right now. And we need to look at preschool as part of our master planning study as well too, not just for our existing footprint of what a preschool is, but realizing there may be a push from a statewide perspective around universal pre-K, and what would we need to do from a planning perspective to accommodate that need should that happen down the road needs to be part of that conversation. And then other priorities around high school wellness, elementary health. I do want to point out that a district data analyst is something that would be really valuable for us to support the work that we're doing, that we will need to be doing to identify some really tiered, structured systems of support for students, both on the academic side and the mental health side. And you can see the other things that are on as well too. But any of our priorities will be informed by the development of this new district strategy and vision, again, with work to happen this spring. So again, thank you for your indulgence on the slides, and I'll stop sharing and be happy to entertain any questions or discussion or comments from the commission.
Before, I just want to say, Tim, thank you for your thoroughness. Obviously, you've absorbed a huge amount of information over the past year, and I think the thoroughness of your presentation is reflective of that. So I see Chris Pareda, you got your hand up.
Yeah, Tim, two things. You know, the school committee may have other ideas, but I expect that you would answer this question by saying that you're going to wait until after the facility study to decide what to do with the Deerfield building.
Yeah, so that there are, I would say that's probably a fair statement. And I don't want to get ahead of the school committee on that process. So this is probably not the right venue to necessarily share thoughts around this. But yes, it needs to be part of the conversation. It is an asset that the community should be. It's an asset the community should be using one way or the other, right? I think that we need to figure out what that's used for. I will say in the short term, you know, recreation departments are going to, or recreation programming will still continue to happen in Deerfield. That's something that we want to make sure that we're committed to, because even though we're vacating, like we need to work out some logistics around like custodial coverage or, you know, cleaning of the building, things like that. But the question of what happened, what the ultimate disposition of Deerfield will absolutely be informed by that study.
And lastly, there was a news report this evening on the lack of requirement for students in the Commonwealth to have a financial, I forget the term that they use.
Financial literacy, probably.
Yes,
right?
yeah, thank you. Literacy, financial literacy program. So your thoughts on adding that to your strategic vision?
Yeah, so I mean, the vision will be informed by what comes out of that process. So, you know, I've talked very publicly about the fact that I envision a really inclusive process around visioning that will include district admin, school admin, teachers, students, parents, families, and community members, and hopefully I can get a couple of members from municipal government to join us as well too. And so I think coming out of that, really a way that we're going to approach that is that we're going to look to identify, there's lots of ways that this has been referred to, portrait of a graduate, profile of a graduate, profile of a learner. Essentially, what are the skills that we want kids to have when they exit our doors, whether they're graduating at 18 or they're here until they're 22? What are the skills that we want students to have? How do we design a set of experiences for them going all the way down to pre-K so that they can achieve those skills, both content skills and transferable skills, right? So like empathy, communication, collaboration, things like that. I will say, you know, on the concept of financial literacy, it's certainly something that there is no external requirement for it. I know I came from a district where the committee actually added that at our recommendation as a graduation requirement for students to have at least some component of financial literacy through a course in the high school. But I don't get to make that decision unilaterally, right? And that's got to be informed by what that visioning process is.
I would add just, Chris, they did add a financial literacy elective at the high school, maybe, I can't remember, 1 or 2 years ago, and it has been very, very popular, very enrolled with multiple sections, so.
Yeah, it used to be part of the week in between the end of senior finals and graduation. But then it was not continued.
Any other questions or comments? Tim, thank you for a most thorough presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry if I talk a little fast sometimes. I love this stuff, and this was way less stressful than making snow calls tonight. So I appreciate that.
You do a very thorough and nice job of going through your slides. It's very easy to follow you. And I know you're meeting with Chris Pareda and the Capital Group by Zoom tomorrow. So thank you for doing that. Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate you having us.
All right. So with that, the chair's update. All I just want to make sure is I know that he's going to report on the capital subcommittee. I just want to make sure all the subcommittees are getting scheduled. So if I can just get, I know Alex in the process of setting his up. I think, as I recall, that Sean has got his set up on the 28th. Who else is on schedule? Michael, where are you?
We are tentatively locked in for the 1st of March.
Excellent.
John is trying to change his flight to potentially be able to join. If not, we'll get all of his questions, but we're the morning of the 1st.
And who else am I missing?
And we already met last week with Tim and team.
Thank you all so very much. Because remember, our next, we start our public hearing, I think that's our next meeting, as I recall, Victoria, on the 27th. That's
correct.
Hearing, and that's when we start going back in person. So I think that will make Mr. Ferrara happy, who I think likes I think as all of us do. With that, that's it for chair's update. What about vice chair? Chris, do you want to give us a report on your capital budget, or what did you want to tell us?
Sure. The capital subcommittee met with the town administrator and department heads going over the municipal requests. We'll meet with Tim, as he said, tomorrow by Zoom to go over the school's request. Nothing really surprising came out. We asked a lot of questions, and you'll get a full briefing when we go over the subcommittee reports. Two things came out of that. Number one, as I said earlier, the Conant Street culvert was not on the list that we discussed, so we'll have to delve into that. And the other thing of interest was that this past week, I attended a virtual town meeting that was sponsored by Hale Education, at which time they actually used the phrase, "The money from Westwood is not available." So I took that to mean that there will be no warrant article seeking a borrowing authority for money for a conservation restriction at Hale.
Yeah, and on top of that, the Westwood Living, that magazine that comes out, that we all see, there was a reference in there that in the editor's update of the interview, they basically said Westwood is not participating in the CR. So I tend to accept what you've said, that looks like Westwood's not participating at this point in time. I also would say, Chris, I hope, and I know Stephanie complimented your meeting, but I think breaking out the operating budget from the capital budget, I think it's been a good move on our part. Rather than looking at capital budgets by their source of funding, I think we get a much better understanding what's going on the capital side. And I think you told me that it gave you a chance to learn about the thinking of the department heads and what they requested. So it sounds, yeah.
It fits into what Christina brought up, that it gives us a better understanding of the whole priority list for capital projects.
Okay. So is there any other items or issues that people want to bring up? Not seeing that, I think at this point in time, can I get approval for the minutes? Can I get
So moved.
May I get a second?
Second.
Victoria, would you kindly do the roll call on approval of the minutes?
Bill Bruce,
Yes.
John Kerry,
Okay.
Jim Ferrero,
Yes.
Lauren Fitzpatrick,
Yes.
Seth Frederickson,
Abstain.
Mike Gay,
Yes.
George Hertz,
Yes.
Caitlin Jersak,
Yes.
George Mahan,
Yes.
Christina Pedjuix.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Were you in the meeting last?
What, please?
I thought I was. Did I miss a meeting?
Yeah, I think you were absent for last meeting.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. Okay, I abstain then.
Okay. Chris Peretta,
Yes.
Sean Weller,
Abstain.
Alex Yell.
Yes.
Okay, I guess what we'll do right now is the last thing we have to do is I want to open it up for any public comment or questions. And let's take a look. Victoria, can you read any of the questions, please?
Yes, we have a few. Kathy Wallace, resident of 283 Farm Lane. In the proposed fiscal year 25 budget, there are two new firefighter hires, an additional 100,000 in the WFD overtime account. Right now, each working group has 10 members and town funds to 9 minimum with overtime when needed. Went from the 2013 and 2023 studies, we know that 11 firefighters is the recommended minimum. The first draft of the fiscal year 25 budget increased the overtime budget by an additional 300,000 for a total of 400,000. What minimum staffing does this proposed budget provide 24/7 with only 100,000 of additional overtime?
Ms. Wallace, that's an interesting question, but it is a question that I think our subcommittee will look into. I think staffing levels really it's a policy issue determined by the select board. We'll clearly take a look at the overtime through our subcommittee.
Yeah, George, I'll just say that I've already taken that note down. My initial answer is that the overtime does not fund firefighters as part of the minimum standards. It is for vacation, for sick days, training, etc. So I'll get more information in the subcommittee meeting.
Thank you, Mike. Next question, please.
Kathy also had a second question. She said, we need 10 firefighters to be able to staff both ambulances. However, having only 10 comes with operational sacrifice. We lose the command vehicle because the shift commander has to staff the engine. Typically, the shift commander is the first on scene to access the severity and response needed at the emergency. This can increase risk as emergency scenes are very fluid events. Supervision and coordinating resources is an important task. What is the plan to get to 11 firefighters in each working group and to fund the minimum of 11 firefighters 24/7?
Once again, Ms. Wallace, that really is a policy decision that the select board makes. We can only analyze what their recommendations are, but thank you for the question. Next one, Victoria.
This is the last one from Fran Fusco, resident of 20 Pine Lane. So Westwood Fire Department ambulance runs bring in revenue. So these are questions. When was the last increase to fees? What is being charged now per ambulance run? How do we compare to other town in Massachusetts with fees? Could we, the town, charge mutual aid towns more money for ambulance runs? Westwood does their fair share of mutual aid to surrounding towns. Some towns do not reciprocate as much.
I think our committee can clearly look into the issue of fees and what we charge for ambulance run. I don't know what we can ask for the comparative data. I don't know what comparative data is available. And once again, charging other towns, that to me is a policy decision probably made between the chief of our fire department and the select board and or the town manager. That clearly is a policy issue. So thank you for your questions. Are there any other questions, Victoria?
No.
Okay, with that, unless any of the other FinCom members have issues or concerns, can we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
May I get a second?
Second.
Victoria, would you kindly do the roll call?
Bill Bruce,
Yes.
John Kerry.
Yeah.
Jim Ferrero,
Yes.
Lauren Fitzpatrick,
Yes.
Seth Federickson,
Yes.
Mike Gay,
Yes.
George Hertz,
Yes.
Caitlin Jursak. Caitlin, you're muted.
Caitlin wants to stay.
She may have stepped away.
I was feeling her vibe saying that yes, she says yes.
I agree with you, Michael. Okay.
George Laham,
Yes.
Christina Pajuix,
Yes.
Chris Peretta,
Yes.
Sean Weller,
Yes.
and Alex Yell.
Yes.
Okay, with that, I just want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, since we will not be interfering with your Valentine's Day celebrations, and we'll see you all in person.
Have plenty of turkey, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, guys.
That is